All right, good afternoon, everybody. Just had some big news come in regarding the NBA, so I'll probably be the first thing I talk about, but certainly a lot of things going on yesterday in baseball. Had a day full of action and another day full of games today, but I'll basically get right to it since that is what I opened with. Kyrie Irving will miss the 2018 NBA playoffs after that left knee surgery, and I know the Celtics really tried to phrase it as something that was not a big deal when it was going on. It is worth noting that this has not been a new issue for Kyrie Irving. This is something that has kind of been a deal throughout his career, or at least within the past couple of years. Of course, it was his left kneecap that he broke in game one of the 2015 NBA Finals. And since then, it's kind of been a recurring injury and something that he's just kind of had to deal with, having recurring soreness issues with that. But it really did not affect him or his playing most of this year. Was an MVP candidate for most of the time he played, and then went out with an injury against the Indiana Pacers. That was on March 7th, I believe, as when that occurred, left the game early, and then initially was just looking to take a few days off, and then had, as a team phrased, a minimally invasive knee procedure. But as I know, and as anybody who watches basketball a lot knows, there's really no such thing as a minimally invasive knee procedure. It's the same thing if you were to, in baseball, if you were to say that a pitcher had a minimally invasive shoulder procedure, there's really no way that you can make that sound okay. And that ended up being the case. And I think while I don't rule out the possibility that Kyrie Irving is capable of playing in the playoffs, that may very well be the case. But I think that Danny Ainge in this front office, and looking at where the team is right now, and also kind of looking at what the future looks like, who they have under contract, who is going to be a free agent when, it makes sense for them, especially after losing Gordon Hayward on the first night of the season, that you want to gear up towards next year, not risk anything long-term for that, especially because I think it's reasonable to assume that Danny Ainge is going to look to lock up Kyrie Irving beyond next year. He'll be a free agent after next season. So, of course, next year, when you're looking to get Gordon Hayward back in the mix anyways, when you'll just be better tooled up to begin with, or at least you hope, you can't plan for things like Hayward's injury that was just a freak accident, and you really don't expect or plan for things like that to ever happen. They look to be in better position to make a move next year. Now, with that all being said, I'm a Celtics fan personally. This sucks. Like, it sucks. It sucks for the Boston Celtics, sucks for their fans. It sucks for basketball, because this is a team that throughout the season has really been incredible to watch. I mean, they're 53-25 right now. They finished 53-29 last season, and they lose Gordon Hayward on the opening night of the year. Going into the season, they were a pick by some. Maybe this is going to be the year with Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward that the Celtics are going to take down the Cleveland Cavaliers, make it to the NBA Finals, get over that hump, being the first time for that franchise. And then they lose Gordon Hayward on the first night of the season. All of a sudden, the entire complexion and plan for the season changes. It's a new system. You don't know how things are going to work out. And it was right at that moment to where every analyst and everybody across the media had written off the Celtics as being able to do anything for the rest of the season. And yet, moving on, Kyrie Irving then emerges as an MVP candidate. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum get acclimated to the NBA much quicker than anybody thought. They become the best defensive unit in the NBA. A lot of these things, and most of it can be credited to Brad Stevens. They end up beating all of these good teams multiple times, some of them, and then they reach this point where you're 6 days away from the last day of the season, and you find out that it's not just your second best player or one of your all-stars, it's your best player, the MVP candidate, the guy that had led the way the entire season, that you were at least hoping to get back at some point in the playoffs if you could sneak out a first-round series, and then you find out that that won't be the case. So the next question is, how does this impact the Celtics going into the playoffs? Well, I think it kind of sets their ceiling at a second round exit. I do think that this team can and probably will still win a playoff series, whether it's against, Washington will be a tough matchup for the Celtics, but I think if you're playing Miami, you're playing Milwaukee, as long as everybody else that they're used to that rotation is healthy, I think that they'll be able to win in 6 or 7 games against whoever they're playing. I think that they've had enough time with the rotation of a starting lineup of Rozier, Brown, Tatum, Baines, and Horford, and then, integrating in a guy like Marcus Morris. And then you can't say how big Greg Monroe has been for this team since his acquisition and since all of the injuries that have occurred since. We've really seen that rotation get most of the playing time for the Celtics the past 2.5, 3 weeks or so. And I don't think it's unreasonable to think that they can win a playoff series with that group. But I think after that, barring a first round upset to one of Toronto or Cleveland, I just don't think there's any way. And I'm trying to be as optimistic as possible about my team. I just don't think that there's any way that without Kyrie Irving that they win either one of those series, whether they're playing Toronto and Cleveland. And while all the pressure in the world is on them, it's now going to be in the event of them playing each other in the conference finals. Because now, after this news breaks, that has become, and I think will become, the dominant narrative about the Eastern Conference, the matchup between the Raptors and the Cavs. And, we saw Cleveland, after Toronto, for lack of a better word, kicked their ass in Toronto, beat them by over 30 back in January when Cleveland was a completely different team. And now we get to this point, the Cavs have won 2 straight against them, which I think is certainly significant. And then moving into the playoffs, if they're able to have Kevin Love healthy and as close to 100% as possible, which I think is certainly reasonable to anticipate that by the time the conference finals come around. I mean, all the pressure in the world in the event of a Raptors-Cavaliers conference finals matchup. I mean, as much pressure as LeBron James has on himself every year to make it to the finals, the pressure would all be on Toronto. And I think that is crystal clear when looking at that potential matchup, because you have a team that has been knocked out by Cleveland the past 2 years in the playoffs. You go back to 2 years ago, the Raptors actually pushed them to 6 in the conference finals. And now this is, as I've talked about so many times before, a completely different Toronto Raptors team, a team that moves the ball, a team that's top 5 on both offense and defense, a team that has the 4th highest scoring bench in the league, a 6th man of the year contender, a devastating backcourt, bigs that are really good rim protectors and can shoot threes. They really have the whole package. I mean, if you look on paper and even if you watch them, you see that this team has a championship formula. They are capable of winning it all. But I really don't see that happening. And I think in a series against Cleveland Cavaliers, I don't think I could pick Toronto in a conference final series against Cleveland. I just think that too much of the pressure will be on the Raptors. And I think it's one of those scenarios where home court advantage plays against you if you're the Raptors. I mean, if you have all the pressure on you, if you're the 1 seed, if you've been one of the best teams the entire year, and now you get your chance against LeBron James, who has been to the finals 7 years in a row, and you have game 1 and 2 at home, I mean, it's just very, very likely that in that event, LeBron James takes 2 games in Toronto, and then all of a sudden that ruckus crowd ends up playing against you. And while this is all hypothetical and, not all of it is, based on things that have happened, Toronto has had problems with playing at home in the playoffs. And I think if you go back to their last 4 postseason runs, last 4 years that they've all been in the playoffs for, outside of that 2016 run where they won 2 very intense and hard-fought 7-game series on their way to the conference final, they need to psychologically get over that hump. And I think at this point, there could not be a more clear psychological and mental test in basketball than a matchup like that. Because on paper and the games that we've seen the Raptors are the better team. They're better than the Cavaliers. They're better than the Celtics. They're the best team in the East. But it's all going to be a matter of, if you're playing LeBron James with everything on the line, how is that going to go on? Like, what is going to happen there? And I think that as much pressure as LeBron James has, both by everybody and on himself, to make it back to the finals, I think that the pressure is just simply greater on a franchise that has never been there, with a team better, with a team that is, really done well against everybody this year. I think that is a situation that the Toronto Raptors know they probably have coming and would like to avoid if at all possible, but it's probably going to be unavoidable. So that's pretty much what the Eastern Conference looks like right now. And I think while I had it in the back of my mind, and I know a lot of other individuals did as well, not having that confirmed that you're not going to have Kyrie Irving back really makes things seem a bit more clear-cut in the East, at least between those two teams. But I think if you look at the other teams in the mix, I mean, if you're Indiana, if you're Philadelphia, I mean, this is your chance where if Boston does get into that second round, then that's your matchup. And then all of a sudden, you get to the conference finals. So I think for teams like that, even Washington, as they're starting to get healthy heading into the playoffs, those are teams that are now seeing that newfound opportunity. Now they're the teams that they want the matchup with LeBron James. They want the last word in the conference finals, potentially matching up with him. So those are all new factors now in the Eastern Conference. And now all of a sudden, it's not just the Raptors and the Cavs that caught a break. It's really everybody that now the door is kind of opened up for those other teams. I don't mean to completely write off my own team in this situation, but I mean, now it gets to a point where the talent differential is this much greater. I think if there's one thing that perhaps can play in Boston's favor in this situation, it's that people have forgotten, I think, for the most part, that, and I think I mentioned this in yesterday's video, that Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum are third overall picks. They're players that are drafted ideally with the intention of being franchise changers, of being guys that turn everything around, that are the stars. And now, they've been role players to this point in their career. Now they're going to get that chance, as will Terry Rozier. And I think it's going to be a really big opportunity for Al Horford to maybe see the offense run more through him. And I think he deserves a lot of credit for being as versatile as he's been, for, learning how to play with Isaiah Thomas in just 1 year, to completely changing that, learning how to play with Kyrie Irving, to planning on playing with Gordon Hayward, and that never happening. And he's built up a lot of good chemistry with Terry Rozier in the time that they've played together. So I think that they can win a playoff series, but beyond that, that gets very difficult. The other NBA topic that I want to discuss today is, of course, the MVP race, which seems to have been settled for most of the year. A lot of people believing that James Harden has been the MVP. I'm here to play a little bit of devil's advocate by looking at the man we were just kind of talking about, LeBron James, in his 15th year in the NBA. And I think if you're looking at the best players around the league this year, I mean, it's always tough. And the MVP debate last year was really interesting because I think it really put to the test what voters were going to value, whether it was going to be, is it the best player on a really good team? It couldn't be the Warriors last year because of all the all-stars that they have, that they couldn't really foster an MVP. But, is it going to be the best player on a really good team, or the best player on the best team? Or is it going to be the person that puts up the most impressive statistics and it proves to be the most valuable overall, which is the side that I typically tend to lean towards, which is why I was glad that Russell Westbrook won the MVP last year. I think what he did last season was truly incredible. And this year I'm kind of leaning in that same direction when comparing that same guy, James Harden, who certainly has a better team than what LeBron James has in Cleveland and what LeBron's been able to do this year. So I think if you look down his per game statistics, first of all, he's never played 82 games in the season. He's played 80 once. That was his second year in the league in 04-05, and he played 81 in 2008-09, which was he was 24. That was his second to last year in Cleveland, his first MVP season. So minutes per game this year, he's actually averaging on the lower end of his career, 37.2. But what's crazy is that he's still leading the league in minutes per game, even though it's actually the third lowest total of his career so far. And, continuing to go down the line, field goals per game, 10.5. That's third in his career. Field goal percentage overall, he's at 54.2, which is fourth in his career, a little behind where he was last year and then 2 of his years in Miami. He's making 1.8 threes a game. That is the highest total of his career. And his three-point percentage is the third highest total of his career at 36.6, only trailing 13-14 and 12-13 respectively. Rebounds, he's at a career high with 8.7. He's averaging 9.1 assists this year. That is a career high. Steals, he's more towards the lower end. And with blocks, he's more towards the middle. Actually, the fifth highest block average. He's averaging 0.9, so almost 1 a game. And then scoring wise, he's averaging 27.4 points a game, which is the highest points per game total that he has posted since his final year in Cleveland during his first stint. So that was 09-10. So that was, of course, a big shift in LeBron's career where he became much more oriented. Well, essentially when he was put on a team that had stars is really what I should say. But I think that's what makes it the most incredible. And it's not just that it's a player who's playing the best basketball in his 15th year. It's potentially the greatest player of all time who's playing the best basketball in the 15th year of his career. And while his team is not nearly as good as they were the past couple of years, they haven't been too far off from the production that the Cavs have ended up with, at least last year, where they won 51 games, and they're at 44 right now. So it's lower, but not too lower. But it's at every game LeBron James is so significantly the best player on the floor. And I think that is what is so crazy. And James Harden has had the best season overall. He's done some things that are absolutely incredible. He had a 60-point triple-double. But I think if, we had a period of time this year where James Harden was not playing. And while the Rockets are essentially unbeatable when they have Chris Paul, James Harden, and Clint Capella all on the floor, when it's just James Harden out, the Rockets don't suffer too significantly. They have such a wide array of three-point shooters. They still have Chris Paul. They still have such a great rim protector and big man. But if you take LeBron James off of the Cleveland Cavaliers, and whether we could be talking about the Cavaliers on opening night, or we could be talking about the Cavaliers right now on April 5th, if you take LeBron James away from that equation, they're 48-30. I said they're 40. That was my bad. So they're only 3 games behind where they were last year. Don't mean to interrupt myself. But if you take LeBron James off of the Cavaliers, they're probably not a playoff team. And I think to see how much they've struggled with him at times, to imagine them without him, because LeBron hasn't missed a game this year, is really, really mind-boggling. And that's where the aspect of value comes in. And I just don't think that there's any way that you could equate that value with any other player on any other team. And you can make this argument every year that LeBron James, in that sense, is the most valuable on his team. But I think it's even more transparent this year that he's the best player on his team. There's not really anybody too close. And that every time he steps on the floor, he's the best player on the floor. He's still the best player in the world by a significant margin, I still think. Like by a good amount over Kevin Durant, who I believe is the second best player in the world. So while I think it's very likely that James Harden is going to win the MVP, and I'm not at all insinuating that he does not deserve it when and if he does, I think that you could really give LeBron James the MVP this year, and it would make a whole lot of sense, is the point that I am trying to make under all of this. So I've talked enough basketball. That's 18 minutes of just running my mouth about basketball. But obviously with that big news and change in the East, something to look at. Because initially I came to this video planning on really analyzing the Celtics-Raptors game last night. And while that was, Celtics scored 78 points, which I believe was a season low, and they shot 3 of 22 from 3. So I think it's pretty self-explanatory what I would have been talking about. But also around the NBA yesterday, Pelicans got a big win over Memphis, 123-95. Anthony Davis, 28 points, 12 rebounds. Etuan Moore had 30. The Sixers beat the Pistons. That officially knocked them out of the playoff race, so the Bucks clinched. The Magic beat the Mavericks in a lottery battle. The Heat beat the Hawks, and the Lakers beat the Spurs in overtime. So the Spurs still haven't secured their spot. Utah is actually the 4. OKC and San Antonio tied at the 5 and the 6. Minnesota and New Orleans tied at the 7 and the 8. They're a game above Denver, a game and a half above the LA Clippers, who are still staying in the race. And tonight, some interesting games as well. Warriors and the Pacers. Pacers had a big win at Oracle against that injured Warriors team not long ago, so Golden State looked to get the revenge there. Wizards and the Cavs, a potential first-round matchup. That'll, of course, be a lot of fun to watch. The Trailblazers and the Rockets. Huge test for Portland as they're heading on the road to try and get a big win heading into the playoffs. Nets and the Bucks. Clippers and the Jazz, a rematch from last year in the playoffs, and a must-win for LA, essentially, as they are in Utah looking to squeeze out whatever playoff hope they have. And then the Timberwolves and the Nuggets, which is a really big game, and one that Minnesota really needs to win to kind of solidify themselves in the playoffs because, oh boy, if they don't, they are then tied with the Denver Nuggets. That would tie them. I don't know why my mind took such a long time to realize that, but yeah, the Timberwolves are 44-34 and Denver 43-35. So Minnesota, of course, does not want to be tied for falling out of the playoffs after the whole year. It looked like they were going to have home court in the first round, pretty secure. So that's always interesting. That just shows how things can change pretty quickly throughout the course of an NBA season. I'll do a brief look at what's been going on in baseball. Of course, we have some games going on right now. The latest game tonight is actually the Cubs game. They play at 7, so not a whole lot of late action tonight. Of course, Shohei Ohtani with that homer over Corey Kluber and the Indians yesterday. Angels ended up winning in extras. The Diamondbacks and their one-hit shutout over the Dodgers. We had a lot of really, really strong pitching performances yesterday. Carlos Martinez in Milwaukee went 8 1/3 with 2 walks and 10 strikeouts. Really, really looked solid in his second start of the year. He struggled against New York on opening day, but really settled in and showed the kind of pitcher he is. And I've always kind of been skeptical about him just because when you have a starter that throws that hard, you don't know how durable they're going to be, how long they're going to last. It's certainly a concern of mine with a guy like Noah Syndergaard, but great performance from Carlos Martinez and continues to be one of the more enigmatic and fiery pitchers to watch in the league. John Gray had 7 shutout innings of no walks either, 7 strikeouts. And how about Sean Manaea, who is looking to be the ace of the future out in the town? 8 innings, 4 strikeouts with a walk and a run for the Oakland A's. I really like him. This is his 3rd year in the league now. I'm pretty sure 3rd. I believe he's been in the league since. I'm going to make sure that I'm not. Yeah, it's his 3rd year in the league. He started off with that 3.86 ERA in his first year. Last year was 12-10 with a 4.37. Had 140 strikeouts and 158 innings. But, so far, this year, 1 walk, 11 strikeouts, 15 2/3. He's through 2 starts. He looks really good. He's one of those soft tossing left-handers that, can quietly get through a lineup. And I think the more and more he gets acclimated and, refines his pitches, as a wide pitch repertoire, the A's are really going to start to see more and more out of him. As far as other notable things yesterday, the Giants blew out the Mariners 10-1. Felix Hernandez, a really rough start. Johnny Cueto looked great again. White Sox edged the Blue Jays 4-3. Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge, Gary Sanchez all hit home runs for the Yankees yesterday in their 7-2 win over Tampa Bay. Astros beat the Orioles 3-2. The Twins beat the Pirates 7-3. The Mets over the Phillies 4-2. The Braves blew out the Nationals 7-1 in Max Scherzer's first loss of the year. So some good series starting. That'll be weekend series. Mets Nationals being one of them. They strangely have a day off tomorrow, I think, for weather, but that'll be a really good series this weekend. A good NL East one. The Mets, who have started off better than I and some others have anticipated. It'll be really interesting to see that rotation match up and that refined lineup, really, that now all of a sudden has some pop with Adrian Gonzalez and Todd Frazier and, of course, Yoenis Cespedes in it. It'll be fun to watch them go up against Washington this weekend. Rays and the Red Sox, they play tonight, and they'll be playing each other this weekend as well. Also, once again, strangely having that day off tomorrow. It's always weird, April baseball confusing me with how irregular some of these series can be if they're not in places that have nice weather or in domes. Rockies and Padres will be finishing off their series today. Diamondbacks and the Cardinals starting a good weekend twirl, so that'll be pretty good to watch. And the Orioles and the Yankees too, so a good AL East division battle for the baby Bombers and the one Bomber that's certainly not a baby, and Giancarlo Stanton. Tigers and the White Sox, it's a home opener for the Chicago White Sox today as well. And the Mariners and Twins, that'll be a good matchup to see across this weekend. Two teams that are really looking to get over the hump. Minnesota looking to be the best team in their division, and Seattle looking to do whatever they can to make it back to the playoffs. So that's pretty much all I have sports-wise talking as far as just other general things. And I mentioned potentially doing album reviews in the future. That's probably something I'll start within the next month or so. I'm not exactly sure when, but they wouldn't be exactly new releases. I'd probably be doing mostly contemporary reviews of relatively older music, stuff that's mostly come out within the last 20 to 30 years, I'll say. But I'll eventually try to branch beyond that, and I'll probably include that still on this channel. I'll just create like a separate playlist for that, and then of course continue to do these videos talking about sports and such. But of course, I'll have my series preview videos for the NBA as soon as we figure out what the matchups are and will be, and that'll be a lot of fun as we head into the playoffs on April 14th, just 9 days from today. Other than that, that's all I have for you today. It's been Peter Marzano with another episode of Pick and Pop. Thank you for tuning in.